Okay, so let's talk about Hasbro and Hasbro's valuation. Hasbro's a publicly traded company. They're in the Fortune 500, which means that all their financials are public. You can go online and you can read their financial statements and their annual and quarterly filings about how they make money and what their costs are and all the things about their business. And they are required by law and by the SEC, which monitors them, to make full and truthful disclosures of all that information. And they have. And I would never want to suggest that Hasbro or anybody at Hasbro has done anything illegal, because in my opinion, they have not. What they have done is not talk about Wizards of the Coast for 20 years. So I used to listen to the Hasbro earnings calls where reporters with access would be allowed to ask questions of the Hasbro executive team. And those calls were always about G.I. Joe and Transformers and My Little Pony and whatever the movie of the year was that Hasbro was trying to do. After a while, it morphed into questions about what's Hasbro's strategy about buying these digital platform companies and entertainment businesses. Lots of questions about lots of parts of the Hasbro conglomerate. What they never asked about is where the money came from. So I know personally, and I know anecdotally, that a significant percentage of all of Hasbro's profits come from Wizards of the Coast. And by significant, I mean maybe half. And you would think that where does half the profit come from would be something that analysts and shareholders would be deeply interested in about Wizards of the Coast. But because Hasbro just doesn't talk about it for 2 decades, basically nobody really understood that. And they would instead be curious about what the new G.I. Joe release was, or what Michael Bay is going to do in the next Transformers movie. A couple of years ago, a hedge fund dug into that data, and that hedge fund came out the other side and said, holy crap, everything you think you know about Hasbro is wrong. And they published a very detailed PowerPoint pack called Free the Wizards. And the argument in Free the Wizards is that if Hasbro spun Wizards of the Coast out into a standalone publicly traded company, the value of that company would be equal to the value of Hasbro, which means that currently Hasbro is worth nothing. That the total value of every single thing inside Hasbro except Wizards of the Coast is zero. Let that sink in. Now, that's probably not true. What would actually happen if you spun Wizards of the Coast out into a standalone company is that Wizards would immediately be valuable, probably as valuable as Hasbro. And Hasbro would not be worth nothing. Hasbro would be worth probably what it's worth right now, maybe worth a little bit less, but some number within striking distance of its current value. So Hasbro shareholders, who would be the recipients of the new shares in the spun out Wizards of the Coast, would double their money or increase their value by a substantial margin, right? Huge amounts of money would be effectively created out of thin air by making visible the fact that Wizards of the Coast is such an incredibly valuable and profit-generating enterprise. Well, ever since Freeze the Wizards was published, now people in analyst conference calls are asking Hasbro a lot of questions about Wizards of the Coast. And they want to know things like how much of the profit at the company is being generated by games like Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons. And now that those questions are being asked, the answers to those questions affect Hasbro's stock price. So they are now, by the ironclad logic of the stock market, they have to show shareholders that they are increasing the profits from Wizards of the Coast. They cannot escape the logic that if the company was Hasbro, if their profitability is based on Wizards, that in order to increase profitability, they have to make more money from Wizards of the Coast, which is why you have things like senior Wizards of the Coast executives saying on the record, we think Dungeons and Dragons is under-monetized. Under-monetized just means we would like to make more money from Dungeons and Dragons. That's all it means. And they're going to try to find ways to do that. Well, are they going to sell a lot more books? Boy, that's a hard argument to make, isn't it? Is there really that many more D&D books you can sell? Are they going to innovate a whole new platform? Are they going to go back into novels and start publishing million-seller Harry Potter level novels? Boy, that's hard to imagine, isn't it? I don't see that happening. What are they going to do to show that they're growing the D&D business? The only answer that any rational person is going to accept is digital. They're going to show the world that they're going to make a play in digital, which is going to somehow magically, through the magic of digital, make a huge new revenue stream and massive new profits from digital. So obviously there's people inside the company who have a lot of pressure on them right now to say, figure that out. Make as much money from digital as you can. Make our strategy look real to shareholders. Well, one thing you can do, you can take steps to try to force people onto your digital platform. And that's what 1.1 looks like. And that's why it's happening now, because now is when the pressure is being put on those people.
I think that might have been the best answer I've ever heard to a question in my life.
Wow.
I'm almost in tears here. That is so well said. And it's funny because one of our past shows, I went through the quarterly statements and the earnings reports to show how Wizards and Magic was never in them, even though they were making so much money. And then just recently, are they starting to put in the terms Magic and Wizards, and then very recently Dungeons and Dragons, even though they've had this property for 23 years and was making tons of money.
There was a time not that long ago, I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago, when there was a strategy inside Hasbro they called core brands or key brands or top brands or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the idea basically was that they were going to divide the company into things that really mattered and things that didn't. Mm-hmm. And they just picked a number and said $50 million. If a brand generates $50 million a year in revenue or more, it's going to be a key brand. And if it generates less than $50 million, it won't. And we're going to put all of our time and attention into our key brands. We're going to double down on the valuable stuff. And D&D didn't qualify. So not that long ago, D&D made less than $50 million a year. It was not a meaningful part of Hasbro's business. Magic the Gathering has always been a key brand, but D&D, not so much. But boy, I have been told things in the last 2 weeks that shock me about how big the D&D business is today. Unbelievable numbers. If you had come to me in 2000 and I walked out of the Dirty Diaper meeting and somebody said, Ryan, in 22 years, how much money is D&D going to make in a year? I would never have said that number. Like it's an impossible figure that they're making as much money as they're making. It's inconceivable to me that it is true, but people I really trust say it's true. So now D&D is a core brand, and now Hasbro cares.
And it's all because of you and the OGL 1.0A. Okay, it's not all because of you, but it is a gargantuan reason.
I don't want to claim that that's true, but now I'm going to tell you why I think it's true. So,
it's not true, but I'll tell you why it is true.
Let's talk about 4th edition.